webinar series powered by BDPA Today. I am Perry Carter, your moderator for today's session. Attendees, you may submit questions from your sessions menu by selecting Q&A if time permits. We will try to answer most of them during the session and the other questions via email before final production. Today, we will discuss game-changing careers and opportunities in tech and policy. Dr. Nicol Turner Lee is our industry presenter for this session. She is a senior fellow in governance studies, the director of the Center for Technology Innovation, and serves as co-editor-in-chief of TechTank. Dr. Turner Lee researches public policy designed to enable equitable access to technology across the United States and to harness its power to create change in communities around the world. Her work also explores global and domestic broadband deployment and internet governance issues. She is an expert on the intersection of race, wealth, and technology within the context of civic engagement, criminal justice, and economic development. Her recent co-authored paper on the subject has made her a sought-out speaker in the US and around the world on the topics of digital futures, AI and ethics, algorithmic bias, and the intersection between technology and civil human rights. She also is an expert on topics that include online privacy, 5G networks, and the digital divide. Dr. Turner Lee has a forthcoming book on the US digital divide titled Digitally Invisible: How the Internet is Creating the New Underclass. And this book will be coming out next spring from Brookings Press. She also sits on various US federal agency and civil society boards. Dr. Turner Lee has a PhD and master's degree from Northwestern University, and she also is a Colgate University alumna. For our viewers, please follow our tech and policy hashtag on any of our BDPA, BDPA Today, and Popular Technology TV social media channels. Dr. Turner Lee, welcome to our Popular Technology TV webinar series. It is truly great to have you here today.
Thank you, and hello everybody, good morning. Happy to be here today, and always happy to be with BDPA. I don't think you know this, Perry, but I've known about BDPA ever since I was in Chicago as a grad student. Yes. I won't tell my age, but that was a very long time ago.
Huge chapter. Chicago is really huge.
Yeah. So I think you want me to jump into what I do.
Yes, ma'am. Tell us about TechTank, tell us what you do. And basically, for our audience, we have interns, student members. We are looking at the horizon. Tech and policy is getting closer and closer together. Our society is getting more sophisticated. So if you can just introduce students to possible career paths. And again, we can discuss some of the newest technological and workforce policy changes that you may see on near term and then long term.
No, perfect. I always love to address groups because I have a very interesting career. I mean, some of you may wonder, how can a woman who has a sociology degree actually be in tech? Well, it's quite simple. I started my PhD in Northwestern, didn't know what I wanted to do. And so for the young people out there listening, I tell my son all the time, who's now in college, that there's no linear pathway. God will kind of lead you where you're supposed to be. And when you show up, you show out, just because he's giving you that opportunity. And every opportunity that you get is just another opportunity to build off of. So I was working on a PhD at Northwestern after graduating from undergraduate. And I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a really, really exciting and energetic sociology professor who actually paid for all of my graduate school applications and encouraged me to apply all over the country. And I'm a New York girl, so I had never left New York. I was born, raised, and I thought I was just going, live the rest of my life in New York. Well, happened to be the case that I got accepted all over the country, and I landed up choosing the city of Chicago as the place that I would call home. Stayed there for about 17 years and obviously, lived some of my adult life there before I came to Washington, D.C. But for the most part, while I was in school, I was working as a volunteer. And I want the interns to hear that, as a volunteer for a public housing development in their computer center. I was a tutor, basically teaching kids how to actually get through their educational assignments. Turned out at that time, there were these things called PCs. I had used one in college, so I'm not as old as Perry, where you can actually see a computer and use it for school. But, I didn't think of it in terms of access for ordinary people. And I was volunteering at the time in a public housing development in the city of Chicago, tutoring kids after school. And they all used to congregate around these very old 386 computers. And if you remember the 386 computers, they had what was called a CD-ROM, not even a DVD drive. And they were connected via what was called DSL or a modem. And that was that really ugly sound that actually rang every time you connected to the internet and said, you got mail if you were on AOL. Well, I was really curious because a lot of people in this public housing development didn't have access to computers. And so they used this very small space that I was volunteering in of 10 computers, of which only 3 or 4 worked, to actually come and congregate. That's really how I got here today. I not only, took my college credit card that I wasn't supposed to get and purchased computers through Fingerhut, Gateway Computers at the time, but I outfitted this entire 10 workstation center. Had a couple of friends come in, had students who I was teaching at the time while I was in graduate school come in, and we basically made that a home for these young people. And that was the bug. That was around the time when the jobs were moving online. The only way you can get a job at the airport was you had to go online because the newspapers had really decreased in terms of their pages. Classifieds were getting smaller and smaller, and there was this thing called the internet where you actually could only apply for online. And I began to see, Perry, that this was a stage where our people who were Black and brown, were going to be impacted. And here was this young girl from New York City who knew nothing about computers, didn't study computers, but just knew as a sociologist, because I was finishing my PhD in the time in that area, that there was something that we needed to do. And fast forward almost 20 years later, and I'm at Brookings Institution, which is the #1 think tank in the world. I landed up finishing my PhD, for those of you who want to know the rest of the story. I did not go to teach. I landed up becoming a digital activist and working all throughout the country on getting internet access into public housing. I left that and came to DC, where I am now, to work at the first Black think tank called the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, where I started a media and tech institute that was grounded on how Black and Hispanic people use the internet. And then, a few career changes later, I'm at the Brookings Institution, where I met Perry actually through BDPA folks like Adrian Jackson and other people like that. But really, my time at the Minority Media, Telecom, and Internet Council, where we were focused on really advocating before Capitol Hill on issues of concern when it came to people of color, whether it was media ownership or internet access. So, during the course of my career, I've had the great privilege of working with the Congressional Black Caucus members, testifying before Congress on a variety of issues, speaking all over the world on new technology. And at the Brookings Institution, I'm not only a senior fellow with my PhD in sociology, I now also run our Center for Technology Innovation. So again, if there's any young person out there, careers and lives are not linear. There's going to be a lot of bumps, and it's like a maze. I take my kids every year, and I don't know we're going to go this year because of COVID. Right. But we go down to Virginia and we do this maze for Halloween, right? And when my kids were little, we did it since they were like 3 years old. And I'm the bad mom. I like make them run in the maze, and then I hide so they think they're lost, like the children in the corn. So when they were younger, they used to cry very hard, like that snot cry, because I would literally act like I wasn't there and they couldn't find me. Now they got smartphones, right? So they kind of have my location on their phone so they can figure out where I am in the maze as adults. But what I would say to all of you is, again, careers are not linear. There are experiences, in all honesty, that we actually have. And in my role at Brookings, I'm responsible for really shaping a portfolio around this new digital normal. And I think all of you would agree that, life is not the same. Look at what we're doing now, right? We're on Zoom calls. I'm, normally on Saturdays, I told Perry, I normally don't work on Saturdays because this is my Zumba, online Zumba class, and my time to run errands before everybody gets up. But this is like one of those spaces and times where we're in where being digital matters. And that's really the crux of my new book coming out next year. I went around the country before the pandemic and realized all across the United States, whether you're a farmer, you're a senior citizen of color, you're a young African-American laborer, you're a young girl who walks across the street to get to McDonald's to use their internet, we have a problem. And the digital divide has been with us for over 20 years since I volunteered in that computer lab and then built those computer centers for low-income people. And so going forward, to your point, Perry, we've got to pay attention to this area. And not only is it a new way of life, but it's really going to be the new careers of the future. And everything that you're doing through BDPA matters, because to a certain extent, If you don't have anything digital on your portfolio resume, I'm not sure how far you're going to get. It used to be you had to have a college education. I think now you got to have either a device or internet connectivity or something that suggests that you understand that the new language are bits and bytes. It's no longer the type of analog conversations that we used to have in the past.
Nicole, thanks. So on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about how does one apply for these roles, and we can start in high school, college, or even people that want to upskill from their current role into tech and policy. So we're going to be right back. Okay, Nicole, we're back. So the question again is for those that are interns, college students, people that are returning citizens, and people that are upskilling their skill sets, moving into another career, where and what is the best avenue of approach to apply for those new roles? And is there anything they need as a prerequisite?
Yeah, no, I would suggest, I mean, we have a huge problem when it comes to filling the tech pipeline. I mean, there are companies all over the country, particularly in Silicon Valley, that are not representative of people of color. I mean, their decision makers make up less than 2 to 3% of the entire population. And as you mentioned, the other work that I do in artificial intelligence, we don't have nobody at the table that can actually check the types of bias and discrimination that shows up in these models, those models that prey upon people of color when it comes to high credit card interest rates, or facial recognition technologies that don't identify people like me who change my hair every other week. Things like that matter. And I think for people who are listening, we have what I call traditional technology IT careers, careers that are much needed now that we have moved from mainframe systems to cloud-based platforms. But then we also have, I think, this creative side where we need more folks to come in. Even if you don't have a technology degree, they still need sociologists and lawyers and philosophists and ethicists that can sit at the table to ensure that these models are fair and responsible when they actually roll out things like, what movie should you watch next on Netflix? That's all based on a machine learning algorithm. The fact that your email shows up with your ad that you just popped up, the other day because you were looking for a camping tent. That's all based on these new machine learning models. So I think for people who are listening, what I would say to you, and it's something that I said to my son as well, keep your eyes open. There is no such thing as a determinist career. I was just talking to a young woman who's about my age who just said she went back to school for a data science degree just because she wants to better understand the world of AI. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I probably should be going back to school to understand a little bit more. I mean, I did a computer science class. I can tell you I cannot move that cow, that half a millimeter of movement by doing the programming. That was not my thing. I can tell you why the cow didn't get enough food. As a sociologist, I can tell you what kind of farm you need to live on, but I cannot move the cow through a series of logarithms and stuff like that. I just couldn't do it. But I was telling my son, it does not mean that you should foreclose on those opportunities because that's not something that you could do. What I would suggest to everybody, you should really be trying to take at least one math class in college. You should really be trying to think about in your professional career, can you leverage your employee dollars if there's tuition reimbursement to take something around tech? That is the new normal. And I think for people of color, particularly Black Americans, having some level of our knowledge of tech, even tech policy for that matter, will actually get you into the door of a lot of new industries. The pandemic has done something, Perry, that I think people need to understand. It is changing the nature of work. So I also need parents to hear this. I'm working on a piece around this as well. We think that what our kids are going through is very hard in virtual education. I'm a parent of a 13-year-old. I can tell you when I'm sitting in my Zoom environment, I don't know what she's doing upstairs. But what I can tell you, as I've now paid more attention, what she's struggling with is not the content, but is the way to organize in a virtual digital environment. And I was telling a professor that I know that what is actually interesting about this is not so much that we're talking about our kids falling through the cracks, but the fact that we need to actually teach them these new skills of what it means to work in a disaggregated work environment, a remote work environment, an environment where your employees may be in Utah and you may be sitting in Washington, D.C. That's the new normal. And so in many respects, I wish schools, when I talk to educators all the time, I'm like, you need to take this as a competency of the new ways, not just how we learn, but how we actually need to teach our young people about the future of industries.
So, Nicole, that's great insight. Now to dovetail into the next question, which is similar. Given the strategic triad of public sector, private sector, and academia, how could organizations like ours, BDPA specifically, work with public sector government as far as governance and compliance? And then how can we also work with private sector? When I say work better or improve that synergy and that collaboration with respect to this industry as you see moving forward with 5G, AI, and even some of the algorithm biases that may persist if they don't have input from us.
Yeah, no, I think it's very critical for associations like BDPA to be at the forefront. I mean, first and foremost, I think you send a message to federal government that there are people of color that have these roles, that understand, not just how to apply and make these systems, but also to participate in the procurement process. That can also help in ensuring that their processes are inclusive and diverse and equitable. So I think there's this play for that. I was telling somebody the other day in the AI space, I get a lot of requests for consulting from organizations who want someone to come in and tell them how to be de-biased in their algorithmic models. And I said, it almost reminds me of like the diversity movement, where companies needed people to come in and tell them about how to manage diversity. I guess I share that I think BDPA has the strength in numbers to really allow themselves to be a symbol of what the federal government can do to move forward with diversity. But we've got challenges. I was on a panel yesterday, what this administration is doing to sort of shut down diversity investments and compliance. It's absolutely absurd. But I was saying on that panel, do we change our business models to adapt to egregious policies? Well, yeah, you have to a certain extent, but that doesn't mean that you can't speak up. And it doesn't mean that you come with your authentic self to ensure that diversity still matters, at least in how you do business. I may sit at Brookings as one of 5 Black scholars, but let it be known, I am one of 5 Black scholars that will continue to speak about how we bring more scholars to the institution. And I think in government, when we're sort of with our hands behind our back, it's important for us to still be authentic and to still speak up, because there's still good people in federal agencies that still value those competencies, and they will figure out how to support you. But I would just suggest also that it's important to bring more people into this field, that we have to reach down and bring people up. Part of what we're experiencing now is we are all on this like hamster wheel. It's going round and round in circles without any exit. And I think we have to understand that this hamster wheel requires us as a people of color to reach out of the hamster wheel and bring somebody else in. They may be going round and round circles for a while, but it's not going to be that long. As many of the old civil rights leaders said, I'm tired and I'm going to continue to be tired, but sometimes somebody else is going to be rested because of what I was able to do, right? I think the same thing for the association. You need to do 3 things I would suggest. Keep developing the pipeline. Keep having conversations like this, exposing people to people that they can see and attain and reach that actually work in this space. As a woman of color, to any woman of color that is out there today, I'm one of the few, and I'm okay with that. Right? It just means that, guess what? Every time you have me on a panel, you're going to have a different perspective. And so I think we need to figure out how to keep the pipeline and keep bringing people into this. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is understanding that public-private sector partnerships do work. We're finding, for example, on digital divide issues, that it's been companies that have stepped up to actually fill the gap of a broken universal service program. What would happen if we added associations like BDPA to the mix? We would then reflect the lived experiences of groups of people that people have not yet figured out why they don't want to adopt broadband or why they're not interested in tech careers. You cannot have the messenger just be green, is my point. The messenger also has to be folks that have that lived experience and expertise. And I would say, finally, when we come out of this, and at some point we will, I would say to BDPA that you have this opportunity to sort of shift the ecosystem and do different ecosystem building. Let me tell you what I mean by that. We have 100,000 businesses that have permanently closed across the United States. The majority of them are in Black and brown communities. That means there's going to be a lot of office space sitting in those communities. No one has thought about co-working, co-location, subsidies for small businesses. For all of your folks that are out there, yeah, we work well at home, but I'm gonna tell you, from this little corner basement that I'm streaming from, it's not gonna build an empire. And so I think we also need to look at associations like BDPA to sort of work as the connector to some of these vacancies that will be filled, that now, in all honesty, some of these industries that we will never return to. I think the members of BDPA are doing exciting things. And I think there's an opportunity to sort of recreate and re-ideate some of those things in this new digital normal.
Well, Nicole, thanks so much for that. So after the break, we'll come back and we have a few questions and we'll close out. That was very, very insightful. Thank you.
When I chose to go to the Air Force Academy, people asked if I was going to be a pilot. Sure, I could do that. I can also be an engineer. I can be a doctor or a lawyer. I can work with missiles or satellites. I can become an astronaut, a Rhodes Scholar, or a 4-star general. I can be an Olympian, or even a national hero. So yeah, I can be a pilot. At the Air Force Academy, I can be anything.
Okay, Nicole, we are back. So the question, when you mentioned digital divide, and we have 2 questions in the Q&A queue, so we'll get to those in a moment. But with respect to digital divide, where do you see the infrastructure bill or bills that may come out in the next Congress? And then also, where do we see smart cities? BDPA, most of our larger chapters are co-located with all 12 of the federal districts. So we're looking at how can we work, better with state and local governments so that digital divide, or to mitigate that, we can now work with our legislators and appropriators to actually get these initiatives funded and underway with metrics, with some success stories.
So I would say on the 5G stuff, I would love to refer the listeners and the watchers to a paper I wrote about 5G, Internet of Things, and people of color. And so in that paper, I talk about all of these genius applications that will come out of 5G platforms that I think align, Perry, with what you asked me, which is, where do we fit? I mean, obviously, we're going to need 5G in communities of color if we're trying to implement autonomous vehicles or Internet of Things sensors for smart cities in terms of smart pollution sensors or, pothole sensors, et cetera. We're going to need that. We're also going to need companies and independent contractors that come out of the association to help build that infrastructure and what that looks like. The unfortunate thing during this pandemic is that there are billions of dollars that are circulating in the universe. And I don't think that people of color or minority and women-owned businesses are getting their fair share. I say that publicly because I do think, and I sit on the FCC's diversity committee, that we need to do much more to open up that pipeline for those types of investments. Just yesterday, the FCC, under our committee, hosted a workshop for minority and women-owned businesses around these new opportunities in tech. I really think that we need to have a similar type of workshop and new opportunities in the wireless economy. There are going to be so many jobs generated. There's going to be a need not just for the pole attenders and the fiber pullers, but the customer service folks, the cloud services management people, as well as, people who are going to be able to put the type of applications that ride over 5G networks. So for communities of color, as I write in this paper, I think this offers a great opportunity also for people who are interested in other types of customer-based services. Healthcare, for example, can run better off of a 5G network, in my opinion, if you want to do precision health or precision or remote medicine. In rural communities, precision agriculture. So to your point, I honestly think that the association needs to write a letter to the FCC and Congress and say, where's our share? Because these decisions are being made during the pandemic and there are waivers and exceptions being made. Right now, there'll be a forthcoming auction, a 5G rural broadband auction, of which I don't think we're doing a good job of ensuring that contractors of color are actually logged into those processes. It's hard to unless you are really floating in a lot of liquid capital. I'm going to be honest, I worked very hard in this on an advocacy space. It's hard to be able to get that type of spectrum through those auctions, but it's not that difficult to go to companies like a T-Mobile, who now has a diversity initiative, and others, and say we'd like to be able to be part of our fair share in the allocation of work, particularly in the metro areas that we work in. I would also say the same type of pressure needs to be on local and state governments who are working in tandem with internet service providers to figure out the best ways to actually build this. And I would even push it further in terms of digital divide overall. We're now going to see, for example, with a lot of schools that are now virtual, a new set of contracts that are going to demand the type of contracting services when it comes to the procurement of equipment, as well as help desk services or cloud-based services. Friends, this is an opportunity to be loud. And it's also an opportunity to figure out Where are the resources going? I was on a call the other day with a superintendent in one of the nation's leading big rural areas who suggested that they reallocated their CARES Act funding to be able to procure Wi-Fi hotspots. You know, again, I always go back and ask, who are they working with? Who are their vendors? Who are their, you know, contractors in terms of troubleshooting, installation? I used to say this years ago, Perry, when I was in Chicago. It's like, if you're not making the product, you are the product. But then two, if you're watching and you're being a passive consumer of the types of technologies that we're seeing, then you're missing the train. And I'm not gonna lie, I mean, look, we as Black people, we have been caught in the trajectory of a lot of the traditional federal contracts with regards to IP mainframe, you know, cloud-based, et cetera. The new digital normal is going to demand our services because these new emerging technologies, particularly if we go into a Biden-Harris win, are gonna be created. I'm working right now, and I'll put it out just as a little hush secret for all of you, a technology new deal, which includes this conversation that we're having today. Almost like the New Deal of, you know, Roosevelt, but a technology new deal that also ensures that there's inclusivity and diversity in terms of workforce and the economic indirect and direct benefits that come with these companies. For the young people, you are the next inventor of Instacart. You are the next inventor of the new platform that's actually going to help create after school programming for kids that live in our communities. So the sky's the limit with regards to this evolution. And I really think after this election, we're actually going to see for the first time the convergence of the infrastructure, I think, with the applications in ways that we haven't seen it before, or in previous times when we've called that disruptive. The disruption has already happened. And the pandemic has suggested that it's going to continue in the space of tech.
That's great. And we have time for, looks like we have one more question to go through here in the Q&A. And this one, I'll read it. How may communities of color most effectively engage our seniors in the use of the digital divide in ways that benefit them and engage the family in the most fruitful ways in this environment? And if you have any examples to share, I mean, I know you just mentioned 5G, but telemedicine, telehealth, senior citizens, how do you see that? And if you can just share real quick, the opportunities or career opportunities for people coming into the industry.
Oh, I think there's so many opportunities. You've named a few of them: telehealth, remote medicine, digital health in terms of the applications. I've written a lot about that. Again, people can find some of the stuff that I've written at my website, drnicolespeaks.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn, Dr. Nicol Turner Lee, or Twitter at Dr. Turner Lee, or you can find me on the Brookings website. I mean, I think going forward, we're actually seeing a huge uptake among seniors, particularly those before the age of 85. After 85, where we need technology to come in and close the digital divide, much like we saw with the pandemic, is bringing caretaking to them directly so that seniors can age in place. So there's lots of new technologies, whether there are Alexas or natural language processing tools in AI, whether there are, I've seen cool things where AI could determine the size of the pill that a senior is taking. There are now sensors my mother just told me about that can be ingested, that can follow your digestive tract. Technology helps seniors on those things in addition to mental health. You know, the fact that seniors can do this while they're trapped into a nursing home to stay in touch with their loved ones means that there's more opportunities. And for people who are listening, particularly our interns, as I said before, just think about one thing that you weren't able to do well during this pandemic. And guess what? You have an idea that becomes the next 21st century genius. And so I would leave it there, but there's just a lot of ways that we need to close the divide. And unfortunately, seniors stand on the other side of digital opportunity.
Well, Dr. Turner Lee, this session was extremely insightful, and thank you so much for joining us today. To our viewers, remember, you may review this recording anytime via bdpatoday.com or populartechnology.tv. You can also check out a listing of upcoming webinars and programs from the local BDPA chapters. I'm Perry Carter, your host, and this concludes this session's presentation.
Thank you so much, Perry. I appreciate you. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, ma'am.